Good evening all, and welcome. Pizza delivery can sure be a challenging job. There can also be times when your deliverer is not the best. Many of these situations unfold soon. As a gentle reminder for all those interested, the Patreon promotion is still ongoing and has been extended. You can find the info in the description, and you get everything you see on screen if you sign up to the Emerald tier. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I worked as a pizza deliverer for a local pizza joint in my town when I was 17 to 18. The popular demographic was the people in poorer households, so a lot of my deliveries consisted of travelling to the grittier parts of town. On one such delivery, I was headed to an apartment complex. It was incredibly run down, with marks and spray paint on the sides. Upon buzzing in, I was greeted by a pungent cigarette smell throughout the entire building. The delivery is on the 3rd floor, and I take the elevator up because I don't want to disturb the pizzas. The door for the apartment the customer was in was cracked slightly open. As most are, customers are usually eager to see me walking down the hall and get the payment over with quickly. I lightly tap on the door and knock, and it swings open and I'm greeted by an older man. Now, nothing seemed too strange about him. He was wearing a palm t-shirt with cargo shorts and looked fairly ordinary. The apartment, however, was very messy. The kitchen was a mess, and there were random magazines thrown about, and a CRT TV laying on the living room floor, with a single lawn chair and an ashtray. He greeted me in, which is where I should have thought a little more ahead. Normally, there isn't really any reason to go inside a customer's home, unless it is a very big order or quite cold outside, and neither of these things were the case. I walked into the apartment and walked into the kitchen. Bad idea. The kitchen was a dead end. It was narrow and hard to walk past someone. It was 2 long countertops, with one on the wall and one parallel to about 2 to 3 feet, and ceiling cupboards to create basically a wall between the kitchen and the living room. I set the pizzas on the counter, and I turned around to have the man creepily close to me. He had his arms on each of the counters, basically closing me in, and staring at me. I handed him the debit machine, and he paid very slowly while looking at me with this creepy glare. He handed it back to me, and he put his hand back on the counter. I said, "Thank you," and motioned that I wanted to get past him, but he didn't move. He said, "Why don't you have a slice with me, young man?" I was quickly ushered. No thank you, I have to get going." But he still didn't move. I was getting really creeped out at this point, so I moved my body into his arm that was blocking the way, as he clearly resisted, and I pushed harder, and he quickly moved the door. As I was making my way to the door, another door in the apartment of the old man's swung open with a lot of force. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and I started to walk faster. I heard stomping, and that's when I decided to book it down the hallway and basically jumped down the flights of stairs because I didn't trust the elevator to move me fast enough. I ran to my car and peeled out of there as fast as I could. I imagine I could have been robbed, or worse, if I had not left that situation any sooner. This happened back when I was 17. Living in a small rural village. I had been at a friend's all evening, watching films and chilling, and I left to go home at around 11. It was quite a long walk back to mine, as she lived on the outskirts of the village down some back roads. I felt relatively safe, as when it got to a certain time of night, it was quiet. You wouldn't bump into anyone, and there were hardly any cars on the road, especially at that late hour. It was weirdly peaceful. Where I lived was a large avenue with 2 blocks of houses, like 2 big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses and vicarages. As I'm passing the vicarage, I see this little beat-up red Nissan Micra coming towards me. The closer it got, the more it slowed down, and the guy is breaking his neck trying to look at me. I mean, there was nothing subtle about it. It came nearly to a full stop as it drew alongside me and I began to panic. There was not another soul about, except me and this strange guy. I was determined not to get myself into a tiz, so I picked up the pace and refused to look at him. As far as I knew, he drove off. I continued walking home, which was a literal 5-minute straight line from there, and I kept listening out for a car engine and was vigilant of any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing and saw nothing, so I breathed a sigh of relief as I could now see my house. I walked in and locked the door and saw my mum stood there in the living room chatting on the phone. I'm trying to interrupt her conversation, telling her about the weird guy in the red car, when for some reason she goes to the front window and peeks through the curtains, and she takes the phone from her ear and says, "What's that car?" This is all in a minute, since walking through the door, and I'm thinking to myself, it can't be him, because if he had just followed me, I'd have heard the car. Before I even get a chance to look for myself, there's a knock at the front door, so I go and answer it, only pulling it up a few inches, and there's this guy stood there, empty-handed, wearing a baseball cap. It was the same guy from the car, and I'm just like, "What the hell? Can I help you?" "Did you order pizza?" he asks me. No, you have the wrong house." He takes a step forward. "Did you order pizza?" "No, I didn't order pizza." Before I reply, my mum has come up behind the open door and says, "Is there a problem?" This causes him to back off, mumbling, "I must have the wrong address," before he gets into his car and takes off. Sure to say that we were both a bit spooked, and made sure everywhere was locked up properly. So to this stealthy alleged pizza guy who stalked me home, let's not meet. I was working in an office building, and was in charge of stocking the food and drinks we kept on hand for meetings. Think soda and granola bars. We would order deliveries from the grocery store up the street, and I would receive those deliveries and show the delivery person where to put the shipment. This time a man showed up, and I had to tell him where to put the shipment, and then he began asking me questions about myself. He asked if he could have some food of the food he delivered. He told me I was pretty, and he asked if I had a boyfriend. The standard "this guy has no boundary" stuff that you would expect at a bar. My dumb self hadn't realized creeps will also pull this stuff off in the workplace. So he left and it really rubbed me the wrong way, so for some reason I thought I should tell my boss. So I let her know this guy had been kind of a creep, and had also asked if he could eat some of the food, just weird unprofessional stuff. She said she was going to call his company to report him, and I thought, okay, if that's what you think is best. And I got a call from them later to confirm the story. A few weeks later, my boss was told he no longer worked for the company, and that was that. A few days after, I showed up for work at 2 p.m. for my afternoon shift, and the receptionist told me that some guy in a suit showed up asking for me by name. His name was Derek. That's the delivery driver's name, and I got some more details out of her. I confirmed it was the same guy and asked her to note that he should be asked to leave if he ever showed again. So, since no normal person would ever show up at a place of employment of someone they had creeped out, he was clueless and thought I would want him to apologize in person? Was he clueless and thought that he would ask me out? Was he there to berate me for getting him sacked? Or was he there for something more sinister? Regardless, I spent the rest of the day looking over my shoulder. 10 years later, this situation still gives me the heebie-jeebies, because I have no idea why he would still return to look for me. I'm a 28-year-old male, but when this happened I was 23. I worked at a mum-and-pop pizza shop in Northern Carolina. It's a small farm town and has a few suburbs near it. I kind of did everything since I knew the family, and they trusted me running things while they were gone. This night though, I was working deliveries and got the weirdest one of my life. Everything seemed fine when I took the order the lady ordered, anchovies on her pizza, and I always think that people who order that are weird as hell. She made a point to tell me the pizza had to be hot when it got there, or she wouldn't pay for it. So I get the pizza and throw it in the warmer, and drive to her house before any of my other deliveries. I'd like to tell you guys that her house was creepy and run down, but it looked like your average one-story new housing development home. I rang the doorbell and put on my fake customer service smile. You'll know what I'm talking about. As soon as she opened the door, I knew this was going to be bad. The haggard old lady looked like she had been a smoker for over 50 years. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It better be hot, or I'm not paying for it like I told you over the phone." "I understand, Mom. I made sure to stop by your place first, even though it was last on my list." "Bring it in. Set it on the table." She said this, and now I don't normally go inside customers' homes because I've read way too many stories on no sleep and Let's Not Me. But at this point, I want this to be over quickly, so go along with it and say, "No problem. I also brought cheese and ranch for you in case you need it." As soon as I opened the bag, she grabbed the box and her hand was on the bottom of it, rubbing it. "It's not hot enough. You do this every time, and I'm not paying for it. Not a single dime." One thing I have an issue with is my mouth. I don't know when to just stop talking and try to understand where people are coming from. "Look, lady, your house is a 5-minute drive from our shop, and I stopped by your place first. There is no way that your pizza is cold. If you refuse to pay, you're going to be 86'd, and I'll note you on the account." She immediately walked into her kitchen and came back out. She had old pizza from a week prior that she had ordered and threw it at me. "Take your pizza and get out of my house." She kept calling me Satan and the devil. Again, my mouth has no filter and I can't control it. I try, but I fail every time. As I'm closing the bag and laughing about how much I hate my job, I tell her, "Alright, ma'am, you will not be able to order from us again. I hope you have a great day. God bless you and your house." She kept following me outside to the car, screaming that I was the devil, and there was a family outside that was just watching this go down. So I get into my car and start driving. Once I'm back, I tell my manager what happened, and she told me that the lady had already called in screaming about what had happened. Her story was that I cussed her out, got her order wrong, and my manager shut her down and said that I'd never do anything like that. But here's the weird part. She whispered into the phone to my manager and repeated, "Send him back." She called once a day for nearly 3 months, just whispering to whoever answered. She started driving by the restaurant and yelling that the devil works here and that we're going to hell. Now I wasn't scared. I was just annoyed and wanted to retaliate because I can't tell you how many times she tried to follow me back to my apartment when I got off work. One night I pulled over and got out just for her to stop her car in the road with her lights on, yelling, "The devil is here," after I jumped back in my car and sped off. Luckily, after 6 months of dealing with this lady, I found out she was schizophrenic and bipolar and had not been on her meds. Her daughter put her in a care home, but when she was clearing out the house, she saw that her mum had pictures of me all over her bedroom with the word devil written all over it. She found me and explained everything to me, and that was the end of it. Let me begin by stating that I am a delivery driver. I've been doing this kind of thing for about 2 years in different jobs, but have mostly worked this current one. I'm a 21-year-old female and have been told that I look about 17. I'm 5'2", and I understand the risks I take with my stature in this job, but I just love it so much. As I'm not actually told that I'm not allowed to go into customers' homes, I almost always say that I am, and that I don't feel comfortable entering most of the time, but do when I feel it's necessary, or I feel safe, or know the customer. There are a few times I agreed to come in. It's simply easier to tell a customer I'm not allowed to enter the house rather than saying I'm uncomfortable, and risk no tip. Also, I'm being descriptive for a reason, so here it is. As I pull up to my next delivery, I am in an area that I'm mostly familiar with, and it's an okay neighborhood, but not the best. It's probably around 8 PM, but since it's winter, it was fairly dark. So I knock on the door, and before I can even ask for a payment or hand him the CC slip, he's invited me in. I tell him as politely as I could thank you, but I'm not allowed into customers' homes, and try to move forward with the transaction and scan my surroundings as I grow slightly suspicious. I see someone a few feet away behind the man, in an electronic, high-tech wheelchair. I don't see much of the room, but I think I heard a woman speaking in the background, but it could have been the TV. At this point, I'm either handing him the CC slip or waiting for payment, and he insists that I enter the house. "I'm sorry, it's just safety protocol, sir," I tell him. He replies, "I need you to set it down on the table for me." At this point, I'm beginning to question my safety, and I start to contemplate going back to my car and driving off. As I do, I see a table directly behind him. I only ask to set down food in the house if I see that they have many items ordered, such as party occasions, which I totally feel comfortable with since there are plenty of people around. I think this guy had maybe 2 pizzas and some side dishes. As the table is very close to the door, I just couldn't do it even if I wanted to at this point. He was just very shady, and the way he kept persisting I enter his home. "I'm sorry, I can't do that." "Oh, but that one chick Jenny does it." As there is someone named Jess, so he could have possibly meant her, but I didn't really care. "I don't know anyone by that name." "Oh, she's been here," he tells me. "I've been working here for 3 months, and know for a fact nobody called Jenny or any previous drivers by that name." After all this arguing, his final resort is to play the pity card. "But my son's in a wheelchair." As I mentioned before, it's a powered one, which means it's expensive, and someone didn't just get into a wheelchair to trick me. But nothing is wrong with the man I'm speaking to, so why does it matter? He then hands me the cash slip, and I notice a tip and say, "Thank you." "Yeah, I gave you a tip so you could come inside and help me." I handed him the food and told him to have a good evening, and I walked to my car and bolted out of there. So my sister and I decided to order pizza tonight, and we have used the Domino's app that my sister has on her phone. She went to pick up her boyfriend while the pizza was going to be delivered, and I was to just get it once it was delivered and pay the guy. About 10 minutes later, I'm on my laptop, doing homework, and behold, the doorbell rings. I get up, go to the door, pay for the pizza, and set it down on the counter. I go back to work on the homework I had for my professor tomorrow morning. Later that evening, I was having a bath. I finished up and started to dry my hair when my sister knocked on the door and asked me to talk for a moment. I put on some new pajamas and went down to her room once my hair was dry and asked her what was up. She showed me a text that the pizza delivery boy had sent her, and it read, "Hey, I delivered your pizza. Just wanted to say you look really cute and I wish we could have chatted more." Now you may not understand why this is creepy on my end. This guy went out of his way to get the phone number of someone he delivered pizza to from the app, and sent them a text without the go from the person he was texting. He thought my sister who ordered the pizza was me. I stand at 4'7" and have a baby face. Yes, I am 18, but still look like a child to those who don't know. This guy, who delivered the pizza, was nearly an entire foot taller than me and looked to be mid to late 20s. But yeah, that was really creepy. I just wanted some pizza, man. Not looking for a hookup. Jeez. This was years ago, when I was 16 or so, and I was recently talking to someone about it and how in retrospect, it was a pretty creepy experience. I'm 32 now. I grew up in a small town a ways outside of San Diego. My parents let me get a job at this pizza place because a couple of family friends had also worked there, and our town was generally viewed as safe. The pizza place had no real adhering to the laws about what one should wear in the kitchen/restaurant environment, and since it was usually over 100 degrees during the summer, I often just wore tank tops and skirts. I delivered an order to this apartment in the middle of town, above a business that was perpetually closed, and the guy was probably in his mid-30s. I remember thinking he was kind of attractive in an older guy kind of way. Super tan, tattoos, no shirt on, and had these striking blue eyes. He asked me to bring the order inside so that he could get the cash, and I did. Again, in retrospect, I know that was so dumb. I went into his apartment and remember he was just looking at me like he was eating me with his eyes. He asked me a few questions about myself, how long I'd worked there and the like, then poured 2 shots of whiskey, and my dumb ass was like, "Oh, cool, thanks." I did a shot with him, and yes, a lot of my co-workers would get offered to smoke a bowl during deliveries, so I was like, why not? And then he started pressuring me for my phone number and asking when I got off. I told him I had a boyfriend when he asked for my number, but he was persistent and really wanted me to come over after I got off. He also kept being really pushy, asking if my hair was naturally red, looking me up and down, and kept asking what time I'd get off, and told me that he would come and pick me up. I eventually left, went back to work, and thought it was kind of weird. Nothing ever came of it, but I always got a sort of sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach whenever I drove by the apartment. I had told my manager that he was trying to get my number and come over after work so that he wouldn't let the shops take orders from that guy anymore. I think about how dumb I was to A, go into the apartment, B, take a shot of a liquid that could have been anything really, and then, thank goodness, I wasn't stupid enough to go there after work. I had not been awake for long when a loud knock sounded from our front door. As I stood on the landing, I could hear my mother open the door and begin joking with whomever was there. I couldn't make out much of the conversation. It didn't concern me too much. According to my mother, he had a parcel for us and wanted her to sign for it. He had no pen, so she began to close the door so that she could fetch one. Suddenly, I heard my mother scream loudly, "There's a man's voice shouting too." Suddenly, I heard my mother scream loudly, and there was a man's voice shouting too, "Police! This is a raid." I was shocked. I ran halfway down the stairs to see what was going on. I saw a man in his 50s with short hair and a beard, wearing a fluorescent orange vest. He was standing almost at our doorway and my mother was screaming, trying to shove him out. He was clearly no police officer. Instinct kicked in. I threw myself down the stairs and against the door. My mother repeatedly hit the man in an attempt to shove him out. I screamed as loudly as I could to try and attract his attention, but nobody came to our aid. We managed to shove him out of the door with our combined force. We had the door almost shut when suddenly a large shove threw it back open. I was thrown back and my hip collided with the corner of our electronic meter cupboard behind the door. Before I knew it, there were two men, the orange vest wearing man and another dressed in a dark coat that obscured his face. In a blur of screaming and hitting and shoving on the door, we managed to get them out again. My mother realized that they wanted the fake parcel back. She picked it up and threw it at their heads. This time, instead of trying our door, they hurried off around the corner off the street. Once the door was locked, I asked my mother if she was all right. Both of us were shaking and could barely breathe. We should have called the police right away. But the first thing we did instead was to call my dad. I was in complete shock, concerned mostly about my mother, who was crying on the phone. My dad came home from work immediately and came in to see us while we called the cops. It wasn't until they arrived that I finally broke down crying. We put in a report and gave statements. The police couldn't find any fingerprints on our door despite everything that had happened, and we gave them the CCTV from our front window. It didn't get everything, but it was a good shot of both their faces. We couldn't stay in the house after that. Every time there was a knock on the door, I would feel so afraid that I would begin to cry hysterically. We moved out a month later. Even now, 3 years after, I'm still suffering after this event. Knocks on the door make my heart pound in my chest, though I now have the courage to answer. I am always afraid it may happen again. Every time I see someone wearing a fluorescent vest, I get scared and I begin to shake. The police did nothing, despite the fact that my mother broke 3 fingers in the scuffle, and I came away with plenty of bruises. Our case was shelved for 6 months. We still have no idea why they chose us. We don't know what they had planned or who they were, and I still feel ill every time I think what could have happened if they had succeeded in getting into our house. Back in 2001, I would have been around 8. My family drove out to buy a used car in the next state over. Turns out to be the cheapest and most reliable car we'd ever purchased. But the drive back was far more eventful than I would have liked. We were on a 4-lane highway, 2 lanes per side, grassy center ditch, when a man of about 25 driving a small red 2-door car lost control on the opposite side of the road. It was later suspected that he fell asleep at the wheel. His vehicle crossed the ditch and went airborne ahead of us while spinning rapidly. He was thrown through the side window and landed in the road ahead of us as his car tumbled into the ditch on the shoulder. We stopped, others stopped, an ambulance was called, but that didn't stop me from hearing the guttural groans of this poor guy begging for help. There was blood all over his skin and all over the road. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. My dad told me that we should go somewhere else, and that being the technologically interested person I was, we wandered towards where the car had landed a few 100 feet away from the dying man. It smelled of steam and gasoline. And pizza. A Domino's delivery bag and pizza box sat hanging half out the tail end of the car, with the pizza falling out. He was probably a delivery driver doing a semi-local delivery when he crashed. That was the moment I realized how fragile life is. We can be doing the most mundane task and still be in mortal peril. I can still hear the groans of the driver as he lay crumpled on the road. The rain, the clouds, the smell of pizza. You don't forget things so terrible that you see when you're so young. They stay with you. The man passed at hospital, or so I was told. If only he'd have worn his seatbelt. If only he had gotten another 30 minutes of sleep the night before. So many things could have prevented such a sad thing from happening. When I was 14, my dad and I lived in a small studio apartment on Hollywood Beach in Florida. We didn't have any money really, but we treated ourselves to take out every other Thursday night from the same Chinese place a few blocks away. They were family run, so the same guy came to deliver the food every time. We found out later he was the adult son of the woman who owned the restaurant. It was my job every other Thursday to answer the door and pay for the food while my dad found something on TV for us to watch while we ate. And never once did this unassuming Asian guy ever give me a reason to feel uncomfortable. He was short and tan, with grey hair and glasses. I was friendly but not talkative. At 14, I was still in my shy stage, and we never had a conversation other than the typical, "Hello, have a nice day." During that time, I was left home a lot. Both my dad and I felt like 14 years old was enough to spend a few hours home alone in the afternoons after school. I was also very close with the woman who lived next door, and her goddaughter, so I would spend a lot of time over there when my dad wasn't in. I walked home from school as well, and it was one afternoon after school, an hour or so after I got home, that the phone rang. This was 2004, so having a home phone was still really common. Ours was set up on the side table in the main room of the studio apartment. I answered it, and for a second I thought there was going to be no one on the other end, because there was a long pause, then a sort of stammering that I couldn't really understand. "This is Alan," which was barely understandable because of the heavy Asian accent. I say Asian because I'm not sure if it's okay to assume they were just Chinese. By now you obviously know that Alan is the Chinese delivery guy. But at this point of 14, I was confused. I say something along the lines of, what? Your delivery guy, Chinese delivery. Now I'm even more confused. What does Alan the delivery guy want? Did you order food? No, we did not, and I tell him so. He's quiet for another second, then, you home alone? My heart dropped into my stomach. Now I'm pretty sure I know what Alan the delivery guy wants, and yes, I was home alone. But I wasn't about to let him know that. My first instinct was to tell him my dad was home, but his work van wasn't outside, and I realized that Alan had been to our house enough over the last few years to know my dad's van, and if he drove by, he would know he wasn't home. "Oh, my uncle's here." And immediately, I think it's a horrible attempt to lie, and Alan is going, "Why?" He is quiet for a moment, then a statement, not a question. "You are home alone." I'm stunned, and have no idea what to say now, as I'm trying to think of something. "Never mind," he says, and just hangs up. I'm so weirded out, and scared at this point, and even though part of me thinks I'm actually scared of him for whatever he had planned, another part of me says go lock all the doors, so I do, front and back. By the time I get back to the front room from locking all the doors, I look out the front windows and see a car parked in the driveway. It's Alan, just sitting in the car. The windows are rolled up and lightly tinted, but I can see him behind the steering wheel staring at the house. 30 seconds later, the house phone starts ringing. I don't answer it. Alan stays parked in the driveway for 5 more minutes, and I stand looking out the window the whole time, thinking to myself that the second he gets out of his car, I was going to grab a utensil from the kitchen. I'm such a dramatic young woman. The house phone begins to ring one last time, and I don't answer it. As soon as it stops ringing, the second time, I pick it up and dial 911. I was terrified, but not because of Alan. I was afraid my dad was going to be angry with me for calling the police. It's a completely different story, but he and the law have not been on the same side, and I was always raised with a subliminal sort of aversion to the police and the idea that anything I couldn't handle myself, my dad could handle for me. Alan drove away while I was on the phone with the operator. I was in the middle of telling her that he was calling the house and parked in the driveway, when he just put the car in reverse and sped off down the street. The police took a statement from me when they got to my house, then sent me next door to hang out with the neighbor and her goddaughter. We sat on the front porch and I told her the story of what happened, while the officers went down to the restaurant to talk to Alan and contact my dad. In the end, Alan was able to get off with a warning by telling officers there was a confusion and he thought that we had ordered food, which his mother confirmed. When asked why he wanted to know if I was home alone, he said he was trying to get an adult on the phone. The police told them they will have to have someone else make deliveries to customers in my area from now on, and to make sure that Alan keeps his distance. In all honesty, I think it was my dad's phone call to the restaurant later that really made Alan realize he had messed up, and not the warning from the cops. He was fuming when I told him this story, as I imagine most fathers would be. He called the restaurant and spoke to the woman who owned it in the first place, then somehow convinced her to put Alan on the phone. What followed was one of the greatest conversations I have ever heard, even if it was only my dad's side that I was hearing. Nothing makes you feel more loved than your dad in macho protection mode. My dad threw insults that I had never heard before, and I was in middle school, a kingdom of insult connoisseurs. I knew that it was a very serious situation, and I knew that my dad was really angry. But I was in the background, stifling my laughter into a pillow. At one point, my dad asked Alan what the hell he was thinking driving over here, to which Alan responded something about being lonely, and my dad said, "If I ever catch you on this street again, Alan, if I ever hear that you were near this street, I'll make sure that you are lonely for the rest of your life by ripping your member off and choking you with it." We stopped eating Chinese after that. Back in high school, I landed my first job as a pizza delivery boy for a pizza shop in my area. I had the perfect car for the job, an '03 Prius, as it was great for gas. The job itself was not half bad, and in the location and where I lived, the customers gave out great tips. However, after this experience, it made me quit my job. I was working the night shift with 1 hour left of my shift, when I got a call for a regular cheese pizza. I wrote down their address and told them that I would be there quickly. After the pizza was done, I got into my car and plugged the address into my GPS. At about halfway through the drive, my GPS led me down this extremely narrow road surrounded by nothing but forest. A few minutes down this road, I spotted an old, boarded-up house, and my GPS told me that I had arrived. I pulled into the driveway and double-checked to make sure I had the right house. It was. I decided to at least knock on the door before leaving. As I got out of my car, I noticed the yard was poorly kept, and there was a bunch of trash lying around. I got to the front door and knocked. Nothing. So I knocked again and shouted, "Pizza delivery." Then I heard a knock at the window next to the door. I turned to look at a wrinkly old man waving at me with a disturbing smile through the window. He told me through the glass that the front door was locked and told me to go round the back door. Sure thing, but deep down I wanted to get out of there ASAP. I told myself I had made it this far, and that I may as well finish it out. Plus, I wouldn't have to deal with my boss chewing me out for bringing a pizza back. As I trudged to the backyard, I was hit by an invisible wall of the stench of death. As I looked down, I saw dozens of perished animals, ranging from small mice all the way to deers. Disturbed, I knocked on the back door as the man from earlier opens up. I could only see half his face, the same disturbing smile, but this time his eyes were bloodshot and he smelt of iron. I gave him his pizza and told him that it was $6.99. Out of nowhere he asks, "Do you like my collection?" I looked at him with a very odd face, when I then heard footsteps running on the grass behind me. I turned around to see someone in a dark hoodie with a red ski mask running towards me with a knife. I bolted for my car, and within a minute I had started the engine and peeled out the driveway. I get back to the shop and told my boss everything. He called the cops, and when they arrived, they found the house empty. The cops stated that the house had been abandoned for years, and no one was supposed to be living there. The next day I told my boss that I was quitting. He offered me to change positions, but I told him that I wasn't interested. A while after, I found a job at a small electronic retail store. I hope to never meet those two creeps again. This happened a few years back, when I was 12 or 13. For reference, I'm from the Philippines. It was Sunday afternoon, probably 5 or 6, and I was at home with my dad. My mum had left to buy groceries about 30 minutes ago using our one car. As I was watching videos on YouTube, the doorbell suddenly rang. It rang quite a few times until I had had enough of it. That was when I knew I had to open it. Knowing that my dad was probably asleep in the other room, I reluctantly went downstairs to open the door. The thing is, I've dreaded opening the front door for people ever since my grandpa scolded me for opening the door for the mailman in his house. He lectured me about how dangerous it could be. I could have been taken or anything. With that thought, I climbed on the sofa, which was 3 feet away from the door, and pulled the curtains to see who was ringing. Note that the window I looked through was surrounded by a tall fence 4 to 5 feet away, so I felt perfectly safe, and I found it convenient later on when I talked to him. He had a dark cap on and a blue jumper. He looked pretty ordinary to me, but we weren't expecting anyone on a quiet Sunday. I asked him what his business was, and he replied that he was supposed to deliver pizza to this address. Excited and a bit confused, thinking that my dad secretly ordered pizza for us, I told him to wait so that I could get my dad. I climbed upstairs to my parents' room and saw my dad sleeping. I woke him up and told him if he ordered pizza, and he replied with a daze that he didn't. Disappointed, I went back down to break the news to the delivery driver, who probably got the wrong address, but when I went back he was gone. Since I was pretty young back then, I didn't think much of it until now. Today, I'm almost certain, and even my mum agrees with me when I told her this story, that I was very close to being taken. Number 1, it was very quiet outside my bedroom window, as it was left open, but I didn't hear a motorcycle revving near the house, nor heard it when he left. He just left like that, though I specifically told him to wait. I didn't say that we didn't order pizza. And 3, there was no logo of the pizza place he was working for. The strange thing was that we only had 2 that were near us, and they had a distinctive red color. I didn't see a motorcycle near him as well, which was extremely odd. My mum's theory was that the guy probably thought that I was home alone, and because our single car was gone, and my dad rarely got out the house as he was unemployed back then, what probably got him to leave was that I told him to wait for me to get my dad. If not for my grandpa's scolding, I would have answered the door, and this story would be unknown to everyone as I would have been gone, and who knows what would have happened then. I placed my regular order of 2 cheese and anchovy pizzas. It took about 15 to 20 minutes for my pizza to get there. When finally my pizza arrived, the delivery guy was a strange-looking fellow, but friendly nonetheless. I took my pizza and we began to chat. Pizza guy said he had no more pizzas to deliver for the day, so it was cool for him to stay a little, and he would just tell his boss that there was traffic. Turned out he was training to become a professional swimmer. He didn't have any family, and he was from Scotland. I learned stuff about him, and he about me. It was a good time. We sat down and watched a game of soccer, and we were getting worked up. The score was 3-5 and his team was losing. I had a bet that if his team won, I would pay double for the pizza, but if my team won, I wouldn't have to pay anything. We sat there for what felt like hours. The time flew by. Next thing we knew, the score was now 35-5. My team hadn't scored any more points, but his team was on fire. We sat there, both with an intense look on our faces. My wife came in and asked why it looked like we were pooping, and who the other guy was. I told her that it was the pizza guy and how we had a bet. She was confused but left and decided to not ask any questions. Now the game had finished, and I had to pay the man double. I asked him how much it was going to be, and he said, "I'm going to need about $3.50. Now it was around this time that I got suspicious and realized this pizza guy was actually 7 stories tall and a crustacean from the Paleozoic era. Damn it, Loch Ness Monster, I'm not giving you $3.50. I said that as he swam away into the distance. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. Who'd have thought pizza delivery driving, or delivery in general, could be so creepy? I had to include the $3.50 story because I love the joke and it is hilarious, and especially after the second to last one, I just wanted to, calm you guys down. Not too much horror. If you don't actually know the $3.50 joke, and I assume that you're still listening because you heard the last one, didn't just click off, it's from South Park. Basically, in one episode, one of the characters' parents come from Scotland, and they talk about seeing the Loch Ness Monster, who allegedly always wants $3.50, $3.50. That's the joke, and he always disguises himself and stuff just to make you to make you give him the money. I don't know why. It's just funny, and it's a meme. I think, well, at least it's a meme on here. But yeah, I would recommend people check it out if you haven't already. You can probably see it on YouTube to get the context. Just type in $3.50 and everything will pop up. Like I said, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to show it some love. Like, comment, that's always nice. Although I've been told in a recent podcast, I heard in a recent podcast, that apparently saying that doesn't work and that no one actually does it. So maybe I'm not going to say it anymore. So yeah, that's the last time I think I'll say it. If you liked the video, I'm happy that you liked it. Huge thank you to all my patrons who are on screen. You guys really help me out. It means the world to me. And if you'd like to join this list of awesome guys, you can click the link in the description and get all the prizes that I mentioned and showed at the start of the video. It's pretty cool, but time is running out and I'm not going to extend it after that. So, only if you want to. But anyway, for now, guys, I'm going to sign off. It's been a blast. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.